Hello and welcome. Today, I thought I would talk about time. Now, what has inspired me to talk about time today is that I have a couple of friends who are on holiday. And I don't know if you've experienced this, perhaps you've done it yourself. I've done it myself. The spending an inordinate, in my opinion, amount of time texting, sending photographs. This is to individuals and also in some group chats. And I know the temptation is there. I know that present day it is, tempting to share what's going on. So, yes, temptation and tempting. However, is it prudent? Is it wise? Could it be that in actual fact they are not being present enough? Now, we're all different. And again, hands up, I have been on holiday and I have enjoyed the fact that I could actually access emails, make telephone calls from the side of the swimming pool, so to speak. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But I also believe we've got to be disciplined. And I also believe that there is a huge pull from a lot of, maybe not a lot, but a handful of extremely powerful corporations who want us looking, who want the eyeballs, who want the time. And so there are so many traps to hook us in. You know, you've heard of them before. I've talked about them before. Fear of missing out. The sense that it doesn't really happen unless you share it. The need for perhaps a validation, even from total strangers. In fact, perhaps from total strangers. The requirement to just share that this is the done thing. And again, I'll use that word, it is tempting. There is temptation because we are in part conditioned to do that. And one could argue quite strongly, no doubt, that there is a tribal element to this. There is a sense that we belong to this bigger tribe, even though we may never meet these people. We don't actually know them. They don't actually know us. And therefore, potentially from a sociological perspective, an anthropomorphic perspective, meaning that we can ourselves not necessarily act as humans, but act more in a way that is like a tribe of animals. And in that tribe, or perhaps more correctly, that herd of animals, there is this herd instinct. There is this need to do what other people do. And so one could argue that in that sense, we are acting very much like a herd animal, but anthropomorphizing ourselves to be saying, hey, this is what people do. This is a human response. I hope that makes sense. Long way of getting around to that. But that human response is, of course, connected to a lot of conditioning. So I guess what I'm arguing up front is that this is, unless it's managed, unless we're conscious of it, and we take a step back, if we don't take a step back, it can be, perhaps even dangerous at the extreme end, but certainly deleterious to health and well-being, particularly mental health, in my opinion. So, what do I mean? Well, let's start by separating things out and considering what most of us do a lot of the time. So to help us with that, let me go here to this slide. And you will see, it says, Chronos, measured sequential time. Chronograph, chronometer, that type of time. And for a lot of us, that's what we think about when we think about time. And to be fair, a lot of us have to think that way. A lot of us have to be in that zone because the world is wired that way, or much of it is. And also we need to do things at the right time, of course, in the right way as well, but in a particular sequence. And so it's looking at the watch, or checking the phone, or whatever it may be. And we are very aware of that sequential time. Today it's Monday. On Monday this happens. Or it is Sunday. At the weekend that happens. And so on. So we measure it. And of course, from time immemorial, people, humans, have tended to mark time. Think of all the festivals, the solstice, for example, just one across the world. It would seem, at least, that giant structures have been built, intricate structures have been built, which seem to be associated with the passing of time. You know, we name the moons, the hunter's moon. Obviously, we are aware of the seasons, or most of us are aware of the seasons, and so in some parts of the world, we're already beginning to head towards, and people are thinking about it, Halloween. Hey, we've got that to look forward to. For others, we're regretting the first chill in the air as we realise that summer is beginning to come to an end. And so forever, people have marked time. And it's not to suggest that that isn't healthy. In fact, one of the things that I said, I think it was actually on a local radio show 2 or 3 years ago now, it was about the lockdowns and why they had been so disconcerting for a lot of people. Many reasons. Some of that was fear, of course, about the unknown, but also because the markers in time that we would normally put in place, like for some people not long past, Glastonbury, a big thing. Will I get there this year? At least I'll watch it on TV. Or the football, whatever it may be. Those markers help us organise and make sense of a year, and often make sense of what can be an extremely chaotic world. So that is Chronos. It is not wrong. It is not bad. It is part and parcel. I would suggest, certainly in many countries that I know of surviving. And I think that we do need to be aware of time. So even without watches, even without timepieces, humans would generally, by and large, probably be aware, have been aware of the passage of time, of the seasons. Hope you're with me so far. So then, let's go to this slide to look at this, which is Kairos. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that Kairos, as it says there, is meaningful experiential time. This is not measured in the same way. In fact, one could argue that it isn't measured, although I would say it is measured. It is measured in the depth of feeling. It is measured in how present we are. It is measured in how much, very often, in fact, we may find ourselves in what is known as a state of flow, where Chronos time disappears, but Kairos time, the qualitative aspect, the phenomenological drinking in of this experience becomes all encompassing and can be something akin to heady in terms of the feeling that people can have when they are in that particular time space, if I could put it that way around. So it is not Chronos, it is meaningful, and it is to do with experience. Whereas Chronos time, when we're on the clock, when we are watching, when we are aware, when we are driven by the timetable, by the schedule, it doesn't mean to say that Kairos can't creep in there. Of course it can, but if we take it in terms of the sort of extreme examples for the moment, then if we're pure Chronos, Kairos isn't there. And by the same token, if we're really in Kairos, we're not aware of Chronos, we're not clock watching. We might glance, we might be aware there is a time at which this needs to stop, but we're not focused on it, we're focused in the experience, in the moment. So Chronos v Kairos. Again, hope you're with me so far. Now, then, let's go here. So what we have is Chronos. It's measurable, it is linear, and it is quantitative. So it's measurable, so we can quantify it. It is linear. It tends to, our experience of it tends to be like in a straight line. For the, whether you think the past, the future, here. Oh, I think I've asked this before in a video. Think about where your future lies and point to it. Do it right now if you're watching this. Point to where your future is. You may point straight ahead. You may point that way, whatever. And that being the case, if I said, where's the past? It's probably the opposite. And in that sense, it's a silly little example to hopefully make the point that we tend to think of that time as moving in a line. It is linear. Wherever your future was, let's say it's that way. So there's the future, so there's the past. And we can imagine a line, and very often people use that type of diagram when they're talking about time and talking about getting back in time and how could you get back on time in time to the past or to the future. So it tends to be thought of, not by everyone, but it tends to be thought of by a lot of people as being linear. And if you think about it, when it is quantitative, so the clock ticks around, the hands move, the sun sets, the planet Earth spins, and so on. So it is measurable. We can expect certain things at a certain time, like again, an eclipse, partial or total of the sun or the moon. We can measure it, we can predict it. So because it's measurable and we can predict it, and we think of it, or very often a lot of us think of it as being linear, and because we can measure and it is linear, then it is quantifiable. So it's quantitative. And all of that, I come back to, can give us a sense of predictability. It can give us a sense of place, where we are in the year, where we are in our lives, where what season we're in, where we may be heading, what we can expect, what could we predict. And that predictive mechanism can be wrong. It's winter, it will snow. It doesn't always, but it is useful to know, predicting that the climate, in terms of the local climate, will change because the weather will change, because the season changes, the fall, as they say in the US, and all that sort of stuff. And then we can look here at Kairos. So it says opportune, it's qualitative, it's meaningful moments. And for me, opportune is an important word, in the sense that if something is opportune, it can mean that it is not planned. That's the way I would read that word in this context. It is not planned. It is something that, hey, it's there. It's more spontaneous. We may plan to go and do something, but the feeling, the meaning that we get from it, the joy that we get from it, the state of flow that we get from it is opportune, in the sense that we don't know. It happens when we're in that environment. And connected to the word opportune, it also, to me at least, implies that when we think about doing something, we take an opportune moment to go and do it. In other words, it's more spontaneous. It isn't necessarily linear. We're not going from here to there. We may go this way and say, hey, why don't we just drop all that and do this? The weather's quite nice, let's go and do it. So the opportune mindset can result in an opportunity that we didn't realize was there, to experience that Kairos time, that real quality, that qualitative moment rather than quantitative. The quality, not necessarily meaning that it is of high quality, although there is an implication here that true Kairos time would be of high quality, whatever that means. Could be excitement, could be tranquility, but also that it is something which we experience. It is in qualitative, phenomenological in nature. It is to do with our experience, our lived experience, which I know some people say is a bit of tautology, because lived and experience, well, isn't that the same thing? I don't think so. I think it's useful to call it lived experience, and those meaningful moments. And if you consider those meaningful moments, Where were they? What were they like? You know, the Chronos moments, you probably won't remember them because it's just, we go on. It's like, oh yeah, oh, I totally forgot. I got in at 9:minute last week to work. Probably forgotten about it. But hey, if you were really late and it ended up in a bit of a disaster, then because of the emotional content of that, yeah, you probably will. But that's where we fall out of Chronos as well. And I would not say that it is necessarily Kairos, but some people would argue that it was, because it was meaningful and it was qualitative. It had emotional impact. So hopefully you get that difference. And then here we see Chronos, order, Kairos, significance. And I love the distinction there. Chronos is to do with putting things in order, by and large. It is to do with measuring and following that which is being measured, to be timely, to be sequential, to do things at a certain point in time, to expect things to happen at certain points in time. But Kairos isn't that. It is to do with the meaning. It is to do with the significance. It is to do much more with the emotional content and being actually truly present in that particular experience. And then if we go here, you will see that Chronos-like time, again, I'm just layering on, I hope, more explanation, schedules, deadlines, and routine. And when you look at that, if you're a little bit like me, you go, okay, schedule, I don't mind that. Deadlines, hold on a second. Routine, no, not routine. We all, generally speaking, need a routine. And Kairos-like time, it's joy. And you see, there's the opportune, there's the novelty, deep engagement. So it is generally upbeat emotions. Some people argue it doesn't have to be, which is fine. For me, it's more, I'm so immersed in this, it's so pleasurable, it is joyful, it is joyous, and it's novel. Very often because it is opportune, because it's like, hey, we've done this before, but to do it at this time in this way because we were spontaneous, I think is also a blessing just to experience that. And this idea of deep engagement, we are immersed, we are in that zone, we are in that particular place and space, like surround sound or these new screens that the TV and movie people have with the lit from behind, and it can make you look like it looks so real. It's not the old back projection. The screens are lit up themselves, and again, probably sacrilege to talk about or to try and explain what I'm talking about by using tech. But the point of those worlds that are artificial, that are created, is that they're meant to be as immersive as possible for the viewer, and obviously as well for the actors, so that they can feel that they are there, because that's important to them, delivering the emotional performance. And so when you think about it, when we are fully immersed into the real world and we're aware of it and we're present and we're experiencing, then this is very profound, and as it says there, deep engagement and perspective perception. Okay, so essentially, time flies when we are absorbed in things. Retrospective perception, rich memories expand time. So when you think about it, time flies. This is very often, I mentioned it already, connected to the state of flow, that when we're doing something, we're so engrossed, our troubles generally fall away. We're involved in the task at hand, and we're not aware very often of those deadlines. You know, it's like, okay, my gosh, is it 5 p.m.? Where did the day go? I didn't realize. Or maybe you get interrupted, which isn't great, but maybe you get interrupted, and you somebody says, hey, you know, it's like Tuesday, you started that on Sunday. You're so absorbed in what you're doing. So that's prospective perception. Retrospective perception, rich memories, another way to think about time, can expand time. We can go back and think about things. We can remember those things, and we can become quite absorbed in that memory, and that also can cause us to lose track of time. So what this is really saying here is there's different ways that we can experience time. The two we're focused on here today are Chronos and Kairos. And then we have this, philosophy and theology. Just to summarize, just to put more background in, the early Christians talked about their version of Kairos as being sacred, divine timing, because it was different from the hustle and bustle and time and requirements and orders and rules and laws. It was something that felt sacred and precious. It was something that felt divine because it felt so good. It was so far removed from Chronos time. And then the existentialists, life, the meaning of it, what is it all about, being aware that it is finite, all that type of thing, they would call it, or can call it, or have called it, authentic living. And for me, I do like that. I think it's probably a little bit woolly because it could mean many things, but I do like the striving of the existentialists to call it authentic living. And I think what they're getting at is that because that is what we should be doing more often than not, one could argue that our lives are so skewed. I was going to say screwed, but Freudian slip, right? Skewed towards Chronos time that we're not living authentically. We're living on a treadmill, and being more authentic is to get more towards Kairos time, that meaning, that opportune, that joy, that immersion. And down here it says Chronos structures life, but Kairos gives meaning, which I think is really, really cool. I do like that. This structure versus the actual meaning of it. And so let's go back here and leave the slides alone for the moment, at least. Maybe that's just finished with them. I don't think there's any need to go over them, and I don't want to pull up any more slides because, in actual fact, that can be like overkill, too much. Hopefully you get the gist of that. Now, to go back to what I was talking about and what inspired me to jump on today and talk about this, a couple of friends, they're on holiday. Now they are texting and they are sending photographs or getting involved in group chats. Do you think that is likely to make them more present on their holiday or less present? And you may say, well, I don't know. It depends on the individuals. And it does. I know the individuals, so I know what I think. But it does depend on the individuals. It depends how often they're doing it. It depends if they've allocated time to go, okay, we're back in what I would call Chronos time. You see, I think that's Chronos time. It's like, oh, I must. I'm looking at my watch. People will be having their lunch, so I'll text them now, or having a tea, or just before bedtime. And so they're taking themselves out of the immersive experience, or they may be. Again, everyone is different. But I would argue that generally the advent of our ability to pick up a phone, as I've said, read an email, have a video call, send text messages, video messages, whatever it may be, has a tendency to continually pull us into Chronos. That doesn't mean to say that we can't get engrossed online. It doesn't mean to say that we can't get engrossed in a movie. It doesn't mean to say that we can't get engrossed in a video call that we may have when we are, in this example, on holiday. All of those things can happen, of course, but I would say as a trend, as a generalization, I don't think it is a good thing. I understand the temptation. As I've said, I've done it myself, but I don't think it is a good thing. I think it is a good thing to, again, keeping yourself safe, keeping in touch, keeping in contact, not to use those devices as much as possible. Problem is, a lot of people take photographs and videos using those devices, so we've got to be strict with ourselves. But I'm old enough to remember, and you may well be also, when we didn't have mobile phones, or at least they were not common. They were maybe more business use at that point in time. And if you did use them, they weren't that great, and you couldn't do anything more than make a phone call, or perhaps, type out laboriously a text message. Remember that, when you had to press the keys to get the right letter to come up, and the same key, And if you've ever gone back and tried it recently, it's very interesting. But that slowing us down, I think in some ways was a good thing, because you would say, we're going to bother texting, I can't video this, the phone doesn't do that, I could make a phone call, but it would seem a little bit silly to be going down the road saying, hey, what I see around me is this cloud and this tree and this old castle. Wouldn't it be better to be fully present? And I think the temptation with the tech is to share it, very often with good reason. There's a nice intention behind it, but it takes us out of Kairos time. It puts us back into Chronos, or at best, we are not fully present there. We're not in the present. We are not immersed, to use that word, in the experience. The experience also of joy and being in that state of flow where we're not aware of time. Well, these other approaches, by accessing the tech and utilizing it, essentially can dissolve the protective screen around us, which allows us to be in Kairos time. Instead, we're in Chronos time, or at least we're veering more towards it than we should be. And that, in essence, is, I guess, what I'm getting at with my concerns. I mean, they'll be absolutely fine. I'm sure they're still enjoying themselves with my friends who are texting and messaging and sending photographs, and they want to share, and it's done with good intention, as I say, but I haven't engaged in it. I haven't engaged deliberately, because I want them. And I have talked about this very thing with them in the past, more than them, a few people. I want them to, as far as possible, be present. Allocate a time at the end of the day if you must. But it's okay. We can get all the download when you get back. Remember, again, the old days when we'd send away a photograph, and it would get our photographs, and they would get developed, and then we'd come back and we'd show people, and it was a bit of a dim and distant memory, but the photographs brought it back. They brought that joy back that we experienced fully, because the most we were doing in terms of tech was pressing a button on a camera that we'd no idea very often how the photograph would turn out. So we're not going to waste our time spending a lot more money by taking tons of photographs. We were more sparing, and therefore I would suggest more present. So I hope you enjoyed that canter over Chronos and Kairos. And I remember a guy, I attended a little talk about it many, many years ago, and he was so good talking about it. I really, really loved his talk. Can't remember much of it now, but I do remember the words, and I do remember the impact that it had on me when I considered how important it is to think about time in that way. Once more, I come back to, I think we're driven by Chronos, and we need to do it, as I've said, to survive very often, many of us. I'm not being unrealistic, I know that, but the knowledge that we now have that it's Chronos time, and the knowledge also that Kairos time exists, and some people get that through running, of course, and different types of sport, and one could argue meditation and yoga, Pilates maybe as well. That ability to access whatever that is for you, for me, is important. And it's important to ensure that we carve out that space and consciously push back on too much of the social media. Yes, we can get things that educate us, we can get things that entertain us, and they have the place. And I'm not knocking that. I'm talking about the balance. I'm talking about the percentage of time that we may find ourselves doing too much Chronos and not enough Kairos. Anyway, I do hope you found that useful and interesting. Bit different today, but off the cuff, and also inspired by my friends who may well be watching this. If you are, get back to the beach or the woods or whatever it is and enjoy nature. Anyway, for the moment, from me, bye for now.